I'm going to start off with my journey with how I wound up getting in the industry in the first place and what that's kind of been like. I'm originally from Canada, and then I'll probably show my artwork, do a little bit of a demonstration, and then we can open up to questions. I hope that sounds good. So
Sounds good.
yeah, all right. I wanted to go into animation and I started applying for scholarships and everything like that. Managed to go to Vancouver for the to go to the Art Institute, and the course was only a year and a half, and it wasn't until my last quarter that I even realized that I wanted to get into concept art. I went there mostly because they had the most life drawing classes, and I started applying to I started applying to as many jobs that I could, but at the time when I had graduated, it was around 2007, 2008. There weren't a lot of studios in Vancouver that were accepting concept artists. So I was unemployed for maybe about a year and still applying to a bunch of different places. Um, Worked at a call center for a month, quit, and I couldn't take it just talking for 8 hours straight. It was for Xbox though, so like I was trying
That's
to get as
interesting.
close.
That's
Huh?
I didn't even know that. So you did work for Microsoft then, kind of.
Yeah, just doing customer service, and it was exhausting. The hours were weird. The commute was really long. I only had about 3 hours to myself each day, and I was really impulsive. Like I quit without really having anything lined up, and I wouldn't recommend anyone do that. um, and I actually wrote up a journal on DeviantArt asking if anyone knew of concept art positions being opened in Vancouver. And Jeff Simpson hit me up. So he was working on in Granville Island, and I started doing contract work for this developer called Big Sandwich Games, and they were doing outsourcing for BioWare and trying to build up their own. I think it was like this DS game. So it was called Billy Boom Boom. It was by what was it? It involved like Camilla d'Erico's vision of that game. They made a comic. I was doing coloring work, and at some point with the art I was doing on DeviantArt, I got a spread in Imagine Effects, and then I got a what is it? I got a job offer from Volta.
Okay.
Yeah, so they saw my work in Imagine Effects and asked if I was ready for a position, and I said yes immediately without even negotiating, which also wouldn't recommend that.
Yeah.
I
It
was just
feels like first job, it's always kind of like that.
yeah. It was like just slamming that go button. And before I went there, I went to visit a friend in Japan to see how she was doing, but I almost got stuck there right before I was supposed to fly out to Quebec. So for a minute, I almost thought that wasn't going to happen, but everything happened to work out, and I realized getting into the game industry, you kind of have to be ready to uproot yourself continually. That
Yeah.
just kind of seemed to be, um, expected.
Yeah, I can agree with that because I've moved like to like 4 or 5 different states just for jobs. So
Yeah,
it's a lot of moving for sure.
yeah,
Until I think when you get more experience, then you can kind of pick and choose where you want to go. You know?
absolutely. But it isn't until you get that like under your belt that you really have that opportunity. And it's also about those skills. Like I feel like it's pretty competitive, and you have to constantly apply yourself. So I feel like the past 12 years I've been like working my day job and then also trying to study after work. Like
Yeah.
most of the time I've spent in my life is either like sleeping in a bed or sitting at a desk. Like I would say, like it would be nice to see a graph for how much time I've actually sat at a desk.
It's
um,
definitely over like 12 hours for me. 14.
yeah, Yeah. So I like living in Quebec was an interesting experience um, because the winters are pretty harsh. I didn't speak French. I had actually learned Japanese in high school, but uh, I guess like living there, it was difficult to actually make friends outside of work. So most of my friends were concept artists or people who worked in the industry, and it was pretty isolating. Like I had to figure out what I wanted to do and how I was going to um, move forward. And I figured like over 2.5, 3 years, I would have to probably go. Like that was most of my friends were discussing that at the time as well, and it felt like there wouldn't actually be something that would be consistent. Um, but I guess if you're focusing on your career and your reputation, you're and you're young, you're kind of looking to do that, right? Uh, so I was in charge of, at one point I started being art lead and in charge of art training for the studio, but at the time I wasn't being paid very much, and there were other external factors with living in Quebec. I just didn't like the weather. I didn't like the way I was treated in public, and it was it was just kind of exhausting. I needed a change of pace, so I just started putting my work out there again. I spoke with a recruiter and uh, had an interview with Avalanche, and it was a pretty fast process. Like I got my visa in maybe like a month.
Now, what year was this?
This was 2012. It was
Okay.
2012. So I handed in my resignation letter around March, and by April 21st, I was already moving to New York.
That's a wait. Is Quebec City far from New York?
No, it's not. It's not very far at all. Um, it's I think it's like an 8-hour drive or maybe like a 12-hour drive
I see.
between both. And when you're in an airplane, you basically go up for like a moment and then you're down,
Mm.
um, descending into the city. So I wasn't sure how long I would be staying there. I had never lived in the States before. I never known about the visa process. But I was open to that opportunity because I really, I really like games. I really like art. I enjoy designing, and I've always, I've always admired New York. I never thought I would be able to make it in New York, especially with a lot of the films that I had seen, or even the series like Law and Order. I remember watching Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles as a kid, and I'm like, man, that place is hard. There's ninjas and everything. But it seemed like New York just had a very particular. It had a reputation, right? Like, um, there's so many different opportunities in New York. You have a lot of access to things like the Society of Illustrators there. There's a lot of publishers that are there. You can go to any museums like the Met, the Brooklyn Museum, MoMA, Whitney, um, Museum of Natural History. Like you just have a lot of access there, and I'm really, really grateful for that. I was there for about 7.5 years, I guess.
That's a while.
Yeah, I became pretty attached to the city too. I thought I would be staying there for a pretty long time. I made a lot of great friends there too. So I guess in New York, I made the decision to leave Avalanche, and things got a little more complicated on that end. And I knew that I had a timeline that I needed to find another job. I needed to apply to different studios, and there were certain ones that I didn't fit in. I got a lot of rejection letters from other studios, but the thing is like it's always good to look for at least one yes and not be deterred by that, because you might be offering something that other studios aren't uh, aren't looking for. Like you might not fit that mold that um, they're trying to go for, or whatever direction. Like they don't see where you'd fit into that. So most of what I have focused on are characters and costume designs, and I like I'm good at that. So I fit perfectly where I am right now. And yeah, everything went by so quickly. I was just working on my portfolio for 3 months, just going between work and then working until I passed out. And by the end of it, I wound up moving around October, and I've kind of been here ever since.
Nice.
Um,
That is a big change in terms of like even the weather, right? Compared to where you've been before.
yeah, autumn was just hitting, and by that point, I was expecting autumn to still hit, but it just kind of kept going. The weather was really nice. So it was just in New York, it's pretty humid. It's still pretty hot by autumn. Um, it still hasn't come. Like there still hasn't really been much of a winter. Some leaves fell, but for the most part, it's green over here. It's usually around 20 to 30 degrees Celsius. I'm Canadian. I don't really think in Fahrenheit. I don't know what that is. Maybe 80.
I don't know if you can talk about this, but is there like a big difference working for Rockstar Games than let's say Avalanche or some of the outsourcing houses?
No, I can't comment on that.
Okay, that's fine.
But I really enjoy my team and the people I've managed to cross paths with here. So, you know,
Cool.
I'm really happy where I am right now.
Nice.
Yeah, so I guess I could now go over some of the work that I have. I'm going to share my screen, and I'll quickly go through my website so I can just kind of give you guys an idea of what I've done or the level of quality I usually push out. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask or speak up while I'm going through this. So most of the stuff here is angled towards something that's a little more photoreal. I try to stylize it a bit more. I tend to like having a flow or working with brush economy or brush strokes, but sometimes it can fall a little flat depending on what the marketing team requires or what the studio is looking for. So a lot of what I was doing, particularly for Just Cause, was angled towards something that was a little more realistic and grounded, looking more at character portraits, people who are doing like, I guess more street fashion, I would say. Their style is, you know, I guess it's like like they're looking more for function instead of fashion, I would say. And I find like when you're working with characters, you're usually trying to find that balance between them. Most of what I do for my own work when I'm just having fun, especially when working with projects that are a little more masculine or geared towards the Fast and the Furious or something that's over the top, I end up going I end up expressing far more feminine things because I find in the game industry, it's just, there are so many protagonists that are just beefy men that have brown hair, stubble, or they're completely bald.
Yep. Just generic looking dude.
Yeah, but like it's funny that that's like generic, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's something I've been doing for such a long time, even working with outsourcing. When I was working at Volta, I had so many different games or projects that I worked on that had kind of that same flow, that same direction. Oh, so usually when I'm working, let's see, working with these particular things, I'm trying to find like some kind of shape, language, or flow. And I'm really attracted to structure. I'm trying to think of like primary colors or anything like.
Or the idea, how did you come up with that costume design? Because it's like very unique.
I've just been looking at a lot of different designers. This one's particularly inspired by a Ukrainian designer. I can't recall the name of, but I would take a spin off that, and I would also look at some medieval dresses as well. The way they were structured, like even these sleeves down on the blue woman in the center. So I don't know. I really appreciated the fact that they were working with flow and just kind of structure. It reminded me of origami, and that's something that I tend to be more attracted to. I also had a lot more constraints when I was working in games because of like design constraints. Like you wouldn't be able to have, like there were certain technical constraints where you couldn't play with cloth as much, or I wouldn't be able to play with those costumes as much, or have anything that would flap around. So it was nice to kind of play with that. Wait, oh, someone's chatting.
Someone mentioned the one on the left is from Muddy Colors.
Yes. It's kind of funny doing this this particular demo, because that's when I was going through pretty heavy imposter syndrome, and I did not sleep the night before while I was painting this.
I remember you were working on this when Lake had his drink and draw thing.
Yeah, I was.
I remember you were working on this one.
Yeah, I 100% was, and I was also shamed at the fuck it all for bringing in my iPad. They're like, no, we don't work here. We talk about other things here. Put that away. But for this specific thing, even the direction I went with initially wound up completely changing while I was in Seattle, and it was a fun process. Like I felt pretty challenged. I really enjoyed working with this. Most of this was done with Procreate too. But even with these illustrations, I'd say they're far more portraitive and decorative. There isn't really much of a meaning behind them, and I'm trying to push that in my own work going forward. So right now I'm learning more about tarot and astrology and symbolism and everything like that to add to my repertoire or vocabulary. And I'm usually playing with I'm not sure, I'm still trying to explore whether I like something that's a more rendered style or something that uses line work. I tend to really enjoy doing line work. If I'm at a coffee shop, people often ask if I'm a comic artist, because I'm usually focusing on structure and line work. And during my off time, it's usually just sketches. That's far more relaxing for me. If I'm doing freelance or in-house work, I guess I'll be doing more rendered stuff, but I know that takes more time, and I like being able to complete an idea rather than spending an extended amount of time on it. So I guess it's just, part of it is because I'm also impatient. So I need to, I've been trying to think of how I can actually do speed painting and everything like that.
Are all these drawings done on paper, or are you using Procreate to draw these?
So these ones right here were done in Photoshop. And these three right here were all done in sketchbooks. Cool. I was using, what is it? Well, it's this fine ballpoint pen. So if you draw lightly enough with it, it almost feels like pencil. And I like that I could get a gradient with it.
So we have one question from Ebony Fong. When you're working on a Beefy Dudes, do you find it hard to find parts, the concept art you enjoy? Let's see. Wait, did you get it?
I don't particularly find it hard. I think mostly I've been drawing women just because I feel there's less representation when it comes to that. I say that, and then I also think, well, you know, you have Expose, which is a book that was published mostly with women in it. But I guess when it comes to games or protagonists, I'm usually trying to think of who would be cool as an avatar to play as. What kind of story could we see with this character, and how they even express themselves. I really like the fact that I can play with costumes and kind of hint at a story as to like why they're wearing what they're wearing, why they're presenting themselves to the world like this. It's like beefy dudes are fun to draw. Like I enjoy drawing beefy dudes, but I guess I avoid them for that reason usually, because I tend to draw a lot of men.
And I guess there's just one more question before we move on. Is most of your in-house work for marketing or splash art versus sketchy concept work? It doesn't have to be current job, but like your previous experience.
Like at my previous job, it would be mixed a bit. Actually, most of the stuff I do is pretty sketchy. I wouldn't be completing a lot of key art or finished work, and if that did happen, it would be fairly rough. We didn't have a lot of time to complete things. I would say at Volta, we would get a lot of people coming to us for marketing work. So I guess I saw more marketing work at Volta than I did at Avalanche.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and when I was at Avalanche, it was mostly trying to get something like an idea done quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, now I'm going to share my other screen and I'm going to start drawing. I'm not sure how, like, if I'm going to do very well talking and drawing at the same time. So if you'd like, you can try throwing out some questions, or if you read anything in the comments, you can throw out some questions and I could try to answer it, but I will probably be pausing in between that because I find it difficult to focus on both things at the same time.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. We can also, if there are other certain questions, I can save it for the Q&A too.
Okay, all right, that sounds good.
It depends what kind of question, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, if it's specifically about the drawing, then you know, like I could, yeah, I can answer that or chime in if somebody has a question about something I'm specifically doing.
Cool.
All right, so I already set up a character here. And I just kind of want a mannequin to play with shapes and style. I kind of have an idea of what direction I want to go in, so I'm just going to get to it. You can kind of see how that unfolds. Oh, wait.
So one of the question was, do you look at reference when you do these, or just off the top of your head?
I usually look at reference. I can I can do it off the top of my head, but I'd much rather kind of see how material flows and the kind of, I guess, ambiance or vibe I'm going for. I'd much rather work with reference because I feel that we tend to go to the same thing over and over again. It could just feel nice to work with a certain flow. It's like when you go on autopilot and you end up just drawing the same head all the time. There's always going to be something new that reference is going to show you or provide. I'm working with solids right now because I want to kind of get an idea of what the silhouette is going to look like, so I can play a little bit more with shapes, because with lines, it's kind of difficult to assess that. This just kind of makes it faster and simpler. And I can kind of assess what kind of materials I want to use. If, like, say for this harness that I'm making, that's going to probably be made in leather. So I can separate the two as I'm working through this.
When you say separate, you're just kind of using values to separate and keep in mind, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
It's just for my own personal reference. When I'm working on a costume too, I try to think of it in terms of like Ghibli food, how they are kind of looking for a feeling of what the food looks like when you eat it, or what it might smell like. They exaggerate certain things to make it feel good. So when I'm working with a costume, like I might, like, even with her hair, I kind of exaggerate a style or a flow of the feeling I'm kind of looking for, rather than what it might actually be in person.
So someone did ask, artists like Claire Hummel have talked about the importance of actual knowledge of costume design being part of the concept process. How do you tackle costume design for your characters?
I think it's not only about the solid reference, but the books that you have to. Actually, let me just pause on this. So I have some books that a coworker lent me that I think are great. So one of these is medieval costume, and how to recreate it. And when you're going through these books, they actually do have a breakdown of these patterns and how they put everything together. They have examples of what these look like when they're done.
Can we have the author's name?
Yes, Dorothy Hartley.
Yeah, I'll try to find it on YouTube and post a link.
I'll write it down here.
Okay, yeah. Actually, you can just type it on your canvas. That might be easier.
And there's also the medieval tailor's assistant. So this kind of goes over that as well. And they have all these different breakdowns. I'm not sure how well you guys would be able to see it.
Not too bad.
Yeah, and it's kind of nice. They have all of these measurements and how it all comes together, what it kind of looks like in the end. It, it's important to know if you find any patterns online to kind of see how they put clothing together, how it kind of falls on the body, you know, and it doesn't have to be that complicated. But there's plenty of books out there that kind of help you wrap your head around how to construct clothing. Oh, actually, I have another book. I think it's like costume design history.
Costume by history?
Here. Where is this? Oh, actually, it's not here. It's not at my house. I left it behind, but I'll find it and I'll be sure to link it afterwards.
Yeah, thanks.
Reference is important. You're always going to be learning, and you can go in whatever direction you want. There's so much on architecture, characters, cars, and it feels like you're never going to be able to learn enough. But I feel even if you're looking at it, expands your knowledge too, just exposing yourself to as many things as possible. The more you learn about one thing, you can apply it to another. I'm not sure if any of you had seen the Met Gala when they were focusing on heavenly bodies. I think was it 2018? But you like the way they actually constructed their costumes also was related to a lot of props or artifacts. Ooh, even architecture.
Uh, Someone asked, how would you go adding colors to something like this, or start, I guess, refining it? You know.
I guess I would do that afterwards. So after getting to something like this, I would probably do this, go over, add lines to it, add some more detailing, and given the separation, kind of decide what I could do. I'm going for something that has kind of like this gothic vampiric look. So I might go with something like tan leather and a deep blood red, or play with like different blacks or grays. I probably would kind of refer to anything in that department, I guess. It really depends on the look or feeling I'm trying to capture. But given that context, it would probably be something like where it's white and red, or deep blood red, black, something around there. I usually refer to film as well. So if things that I'm particularly attracted to is the whole yellow, red, blue, green, and maybe some purple, like a touch of purple, because I find that's, I don't know, you can always play with the amount that you're using on either um, in either scene or any kind of costume. And I usually, before going to do that, will try to figure out like the amount or frequency in which I'm kind of um, trying to produce that. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in like so close to primary. Like you can kind of go anywhere with those. It could be any kind of red or blue. You can just kind of play with it and keep switching that up.
Is there like a certain like ratio that you find that always works? Like if you have like 70% of like the red and then like 20% of the green or something.
Oh no, I just kind of try to play with it and feel it out. Usually I'm just trying to get like a medium, like the main color, the medium read, and then something that could be like a little accent. And then if I really want to add something else, it might be like just a touch of that. But I can play with it from costume to costume. So it doesn't always have to be the be all end all for each one. I could just like flip it on its head later. But I'm not looking for any kind of specific ratio or being too strict about it. Yeah, and those are all like kind of the same colors, but at different saturation points and different ratios. So I can see how those feel together and then apply it to whatever it is that I'm working on. If I find it's something that's, I guess, if it's a costume or a scene, if I find it's something that has a lot of passion or anger or whatever, I think, or maybe it's very lucky, I might use red, or maybe there's like love in that, right? If you're looking for yellow, it might be a little more cheerful, but you could also try to think of like, how can I make yellow look creepy, or like, what is it that I could apply to this scene to kind of accentuate that? I found Blade Runner used a lot of yellow to add mystery, even when he was going to, like, especially the most recent one, going to Vegas. But it was also kind of a sign of pollution.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting too, watching watching cinema, because every third world country has kind of a yellow color scheme going on, which I'm curious about why that's a constant thing. And I know some people, when they see yellow, sometimes think of a chain smoker's room or something it's aged over time if you're looking at paper. So it has a bunch of different connotations when you're thinking about those colors and how you're trying to make somebody feel. I would just suggest playing with it, and those four colors you can really push in whatever direction that you want.
I don't know if this is too early to ask, but like if you were to refine these costumes, how do you know like how to add the folds and like where the cuts are for the clothing?
Oh, so there's usually tension points here.
Like, that's one thing I actually struggle with a lot when I do characters because I was like, I have no idea.
Yeah, so that's where I find reference comes in handy, or even using Marvelous Designer, because it's going to simulate what you're looking for or what might feel nice. Let's see. So I would say like maybe folds would kind of be here. They would bunch up where there's a bit of tension, and then they would go down. And wherever there's this point, which the clothing folds, you're either going to have some folds, or there's going to be you'll get a sense of like the gravity that's falling there. Like I guess usually when I'm doing it, I've done it so often I don't even really think about it that much. Typically, like by the elbow, you're going to see some tension points too, because there's a lot of movement and motion. You can kind of see it on my sleeve here. And this is a lightweight material. It's going to fall differently. Whereas this is pretty heavy. You don't really see a lot of folds. It just falls like very softly. But usually when there's like this kind of detailing right here, there's an intentional fold as well. So it might be just for aesthetic. I'm not sure if you can make it out.
I never even think about how heavy the material is will create different folds. You know?
Yeah. It might be something that's a little firmer and you won't get a lot of folding at all. And then you'll have something that's softer that tends to fold a hell of a lot more on the body. It's like when you see tulle and like I guess a tutu or anything like that, the way that it folds.
Yeah, or like a
there's usually a lot
poncho
of it.
is different.
Yeah. Or any point in which you have another material touching this or interacting with the rest of the outfit, you might actually see tension points between these two parts. You want to show that they're interacting somehow, so you'll have a fold probably bulging on the side and a fold over here. And it'll be different for drapery too, because you're going to have gravity that's interacting with this fabric, right? So you're not going to have a bunch of folds that are going to be like this all the way down, a bunch of horizontal folds. It'll just feel a little weird. It's going to likely fall down like this, depending on the type of material you're using, or if it's pleated or not.
Yeah, it's very helpful. Awesome.
Usually I try to keep this in mind too. There's usually more of an eye shape when it comes to folds. I try to get that in. It would interact with one another. Kind of see that on, well, actually, let's see. Yeah, so usually like this, like I try to not draw exactly what I'm seeing. I try to think of the shapes that they're making, if that makes sense. I find it's a lot easier to break it down if you're only focusing on those shapes and the fact that, these folds are kind of like little tubes. How you can have something over here and kind of drape it down, what that structure might look like. You can just you can keep repeating that same kind of thing depending on how baggy this is. And it also depends on how you want this clothing to be presented as well, because something like this might not suit the character's outfit. You might want something that's a little more form-fitting and doesn't fold as much. And that again depends on the fabric you're using, if it's a coat, if it's If it's heavy, if it's light, if it's a shirt. Like if she was wearing a suit and you just had a bunch of folds, it wouldn't feel as form-fitting, and it would feel like maybe she has like this oversized thing. It's like super, super baggy.
Someone says, whenever I draw folds now, I will never unsee eye shapes.
They're fine. They're fine. Sometimes I get caught up in the physicality of things, like even doing this hair. It's just like, oh, I'm just going to do this twirly thing. And we're just going to put this in the opposite direction so you constantly see this pattern. Kind of keep going with it if you wanted to. Just kind of to imply that. I used to do a lot of exercises like this too, because one of my favorite things to draw was dragons when I was a kid. So usually when you're doing, you're focusing on the structure of the form, you have something like this, and you're thinking of how it's going to look aesthetically. Not necessarily that a snake's body would entirely look like this. I would even consider calligraphy when trying to design a snake or a dragon. And you just kind of figure out where the spine is and try to think about what the structure might be like. And I just kind of apply that to folds and curls and hair and everything like that. Even when I'm making flowers, I'm thinking of scales and how that all kind of comes together. Sometimes it's just fun to do, like you enjoy the motion of it, because I think we often forget about the physical side of drawing. We're just trying to like get it out, but it's really just the motion and the patterns you might be making. Oh, I'm sorry. I think at this point though, like if you guys have any more questions.
Yeah, so I think we can move on to the Q&A if you're done with this.
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay. So I guess from Tyler H, how has the experience of remote work in art been, especially recently?
So it took me a bit to get a routine down. I got very accustomed to just sitting at home. I didn't take care of myself very often enough or go for walks. I was a little afraid to go outside, to be quite honest. And even working out, I just kind of gave up for a bit. I still haven't worked out. I've just been getting into it this past week after after all these months. And I think for the most part, just setting up a schedule, like I like bullet journaling. So setting up a schedule in there and making sure that I consistently stick with it helps. Structure really helps. Even if it's something nice for me, if during lunch I want to go for a bike ride, now I will. And if I want to watch an episode of one of my favorite shows, I'll do that. I'll make sure I schedule that in so I can break away from just staring at the screen, because I've been staring at the screen a lot.
Yeah, I find like just working from home, it's really easy to lose track of time.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you're working 24/7 before you know it.
Yeah, it was really easy for me to fall into that pattern, and I'm pretty I'm pretty stiff right now. I've definitely been trying to do more yoga between like 6 and 7.
Yeah, God, I need that because my back has been hurting for like a few months now.
Yeah, we're not just drawing machines.
Yeah. So Hua Ming asks, could I hear more about your experience working abroad in different states? What's the biggest challenge, visa issues, and cultural differences?
I guess, well, rent was definitely a challenge in New York. But like we're space, like the amount of space you get for the price that you're paying in New York is pretty big. I didn't really have many visa issues. The companies usually took care of that. The only thing is that every 3 years I have to get it renewed because I have an I-94. But I know it can be different for other, like people coming in from other countries. I'm sure if I were to work in Berlin or go to the Netherlands or something like that, I would have to sign up for a whole different visa process because between Canada and the US, I think there's this trade agreement, NAFTA, that's involved. I could be mistaken. I'm pretty sure that's what it is.
Yeah,
But
no, I heard it's easier for Canadians to come over here to work.
yeah, and anyone who's coming in from Mexico as well. So that's worked out pretty well for me. Sometimes you don't know if somebody there is going to be difficult with you. There was one situation across the border where I had an officer tell me that it wasn't time for me to renew my visa, and I solely used that trip to renew my visa, and he turned me away because they hold you in there for about a half hour, and if I stayed
Oh
there
man.
any longer, and sometimes it could be longer, if I stayed there any longer, I would miss my flight. So he turned me away, and then my the manager I had at the time was that it was a little weird because you should be able to go in there like a month earlier and get that. And it's
Yeah.
also, it's inconvenient because it's like you paid money specifically to get that renewed.
Was this the US custom person or is this the Canadian
It
side?
was Canadian. Yeah.
Really? Okay. Because I mean, I'll tell a short story where we went to Canada for a friend's wedding, and the Canadian border patrol were really nice, but then
Mhm.
the U.S. ones were really like mean or like they're very like serious about stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that definitely intimidated me. They asked me how much do I have any alcohol, and I was like, I have 6 alcohol, and they're like, what do you mean 6 alcohol? Like, because you need bottles or cans, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I would say some of the, like some of the challenges I had in different locations, Quebec was actually pretty hard. I had people yelling at me to speak French a lot of the time, even when I wasn't speaking with them. And I, if I was with my roommate, there was this person that we frequently came across that would speak English with my roommate because he was from Malaysia, but he would only speak French with me. And we would be standing next to each other, like kind of constantly having to go over that over several years and even still trying to learn French, but then not like it didn't feel like I was learning it for me anymore. There was a lot more pressure to get that done. And even then, the classes weren't consistent either. So it was a challenge trying to balance work and focus on creativity when you're also being confronted with something like that. I definitely became far more introverted when I was in Quebec than I had been while I was living in Vancouver. Um, when I was in New York, I guess it's kind of its own city. I wouldn't say that there was. I'm trying to think of like things that were a little more difficult for me, but it was very convenient to get around from place to place. So
I mean, I'm from Connecticut, but first thing people think about New York is how the people there are kind of mean, I guess. And but once you get to know them, they're like really cool. At least that's what I hear from people.
I, oh, sorry. Um, I never took issue with that because I actually prefer if people tell me straight what they feel and what they're thinking. They don't bullshit. I prefer if people are direct.
Yeah.
And I'm not really bothered by somebody who's mean for a moment because I'm going to be in a completely different area within the next hour to a half hour just using transit or the train. It's just like you can kind of disappear in the crowd. So it's not so much I'm something that I ever took issue with at all.
So there's a few questions now. I was wondering if you want to answer those. your biggest inspiration? It can be artists or other things as well.
Hmm. I really like to travel. Like I like having new experiences, going to different locations. I'm very excited to meet new people, and I I find like getting
Yankee said plants.
probably plants. Plants. Yeah, that's a big part of it, but that kind of stems from my love of Ghibli films and everything like that, right? So I'm just trying to achieve that level of green in my house because I love those films so much. At
Yeah.
Princess Mononoke and Nausicaa and Kiki's Delivery Service, Spirited Away, like those really impacted me at a young age. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to study animation and look more into that as well. I've always enjoyed Cowboy Bebop. Like I would say those are a source of information for me, but I was always very shy about talking about it because when I went to college, people openly discouraged students from being inspired by anime. Like they shamed them for it.
I was, yeah, when I went to art school, it was the same thing. And then
Yeah,
it's crazy because then I see what everyone else is doing and all the new stuff coming out. I'm like, that's totally influenced by anime and Japanese.
100%,
It's crazy. Like, yeah.
100%. So like, I don't know. I think it's really important to kind of cultivate your own interests and lean into them. I found like I mean, it was important to explore other things and expose yourself. Like I like challenging myself to different things. Like as far as artists are concerned, I love a lot of the ukiyo-e uh, illustrations, like the woodblock prints, like Kusanada or Kinoyoshi Hokusai. Like I've always loved that aesthetic, that work. I love the golden age of illustration. I like Robert McGinnis, um, J.C. Leyendecker, and Norman Rockwell, right? And some of the illustrators that I really like now are like Josh Cochran, Jillian Tamaki, Sam Weber, Tron Wen, James Jean, and Phil Hale, Ashley Wood, Kent Williams. Like I have like a stockpile of folders just filled with like by artist work. I also really enjoyed looking at character sheets by like for Escaflowne or um, Cowboy Bebop, Akira. I liked looking at manga like Berserk, even though it's pretty intense, but you can kind of see how the artist grew over a period of time and how much he improved from
Yeah,
the
that's
beginning to the
one.
end.
Yeah. Anyone one of those like long running comics, you just see the improvement. It's really crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's wild, like just to see how much they improve with it, like those technical skills over time. But that's been going on for over 30 years now, right? Like that series in particular.
Here's another question. Do you have any advice you would give to people who are just starting out or early in their career?
Just keep exposing yourself to new things and don't rely so much on external validation. Try to do something that is unique to you. Cultivate your own points of reference or inspiration as well. Try to look at abstract art. Try to look at anything like just throw yourself into art history. Uh, Look at architecture. Look at whatever you can, like even car design. There's so many interesting things that you can pull from. Just be open to seeing new things and trying new things.
I guess this is just a last question before we end this. So the last question was, have you found any good habits to help with artistic and workplace self-confidence and beat back the imposter syndrome?
I would say affirmations are a good one.
Hold on,
Therapy
I got
helps. Therapy definitely helps. Um, and journaling, like journaling has helped me a lot. And I usually try to read about philosophy as well to kind of get a gauge for how to look at life or navigate this world too. You know, if you're really struggling with self-esteem and putting yourself out there, try to kind of like amp yourself up, you know, because nobody, like, I've had a lot of people who've supported me and helped me and have been great role models, but you need to be able to love yourself and also just believe in yourself. Like, you have to be in your corner. Why kick yourself when you're already down, right? Um, Assuming that you're struggling with imposter syndrome, like, why are you beating yourself up? Like, why aren't you trying to cheer yourself on? Like, you kind of have to be your own cheerleader, right?
I'm sorry. So there is one more question,
It's okay.
and this would be the last one. And so, what sort of advice would you have for working artists who have trouble maintaining their enthusiasm for a project?
Take a sabbatical.
Not everyone can afford that.
No, that's true. That's true. If start start scheduling out a day where you don't do anything art related. Do something else that you enjoy, or take up another hobby that isn't related to art, and try to mix things up. Like, challenge yourself with a different style. Try to do something different that's on your own time. Like, the time away from your canvas is just as important as the time spent at it. So you need those moments where you're just kind of allowing your mind to relax.
I think another advice I gotten from, I think it was like Trevor Claxton, that I found worked pretty well, was like, let's say you're doing a environment and you hate painting environments, but then what you can do is just focus on, let's say, just the clouds, and say like, I want to just learn how to paint clouds with the fewest brushstrokes.
Yeah.
And then that's a goal that you can apply to your work and make your work a little bit more fun, and you get better, at the same time. So.
Yeah, bringing your focus or attention to a very specific aspect of the work can really help.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you for the talk. It was definitely very informative, and yeah.
Thank you everyone for joining.
Cool. So yeah, so that's it for the talk, and once Anna sees the recording, we'll decide if we were going to put this on YouTube or not. But other than that, see you guys later, and hope everyone's doing well.
Take care.